All right, today we're doing something a little different. We're going to look at social dynamics not just as an art, something you feel out, but as a science, a problem that can actually be solved with a set of equations.
So, let's start with the big question. What is the real difference between just being social and actually having game? Are they the same thing? Is one more important than the other? It seems complicated, right? But what if I told you we could break it all down into some pretty simple math?
That's really the core idea here. We're going to forget all the vague advice for a minute and look at social interactions through the lens of mathematics. We're talking about a system where every single piece can be defined, measured, and, ultimately, improved.
Now, this entire framework comes from the work of a social theorist named Guy Gambit, who also goes by the social tactician. So I want you to think of this as your own personal masterclass. The chalkboard's ready, and we are about to dive into the hidden formulas that kind of govern human connection.
Okay, so, like any good mathematical proof, we have to start by defining our terms. Can't solve for x if you don't know what x is, right? So before we even get to the equations, let's lock in our two main concepts, socializing and game.
First up, our baseline variable, socializing, which we'll call SZ. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's the simple act of being around other people, talking, interacting. It is the absolute foundation that everything else we're going to talk about is built on.
And next, we've got our second key term, game, or just G. Now, look closely at how this is defined. It builds directly on that last concept. See, game isn't some totally separate skill. It's the sum of your socializing abilities plus an extra intentional piece. This is so important. You can't have game if you haven't first mastered the basics of just being social.
Guy Gambit actually has a perfect way to think about this. He says, you are the conductor. The interpersonal and environmental forces at play are the orchestra. Game is the music. It's not just random noise. It's something you are creating, controlled, purposeful, and hopefully harmonious.
All right, so we have our two big ideas, socializing and game. Now it's time to break them down into their core variables. Think of these as the individual numbers and symbols that make up the equations we're about to build.
First up, we've got C, and that stands for congruence. This is all about your static presentation, how you look just standing there. Do you fit the place you're in? Does your outfit make sense for the vibe? It's literally the first impression you make before you even open your mouth.
Next, we have SC, or social calibration. Now, if congruence was static, social calibration is all about being dynamic. This is your body language, your tone of voice, your energy level. It's about reading the room and actually adjusting what you're doing in real time.
Our third variable, and man, this one is crucial, is A, for authenticity. This is the magic ingredient that makes an interaction feel real instead of rehearsed. Is the conversation just flowing, or does it feel like you're reading from a script? Authenticity is really the difference between a genuine connection and just a hollow performance.
And our last variable is AG, which stands for actively gaming. Now, this is the component that really draws the line between just socializing and gaming. It is a conscious, intentional action. It's not passive, and it has a very specific goal, to create some kind of emotional response, to spark a romantic or sexual connection.
Okay, so we've got our variables, C, SC, and A. Now let's put them together. It's time to assemble our very first major formula, the equation for what we'll call perfect socializing.
And there it is. The equation for perfect socializing is just this, SZ equals C plus SC plus A. So what this means is that to be a perfect socializer, you need all three of these things working at once. You look the part, that's congruence. You act the part, that's social calibration. And the whole thing feels totally real. That's authenticity.
Now, of course, that's the ideal. That's the perfect score. But what happens in the real world when one or maybe even more of these variables is missing? Well, this is where the math really becomes a powerful tool for figuring out what's going wrong.
This table just lays out the common failure points perfectly. So, for example, if you've got congruence in social calibration, but you're missing authenticity, well, the whole interaction just feels fake. Or take away social calibration and you get the introverted loner, someone who looks like they belong but doesn't do anything. Flip that, remove congruence instead, and you get the weird extrovert. Tons of energy, but they just don't fit in. And if you've got none of the variables, the framework calls this the creepy weirdo. It's a harsh term for sure, but it accurately describes how a total lack of these skills can come across.
So we have now mathematically defined socializing and all of its potential problems. Let's build on that foundation to create our final and more complex equation. It is time to solve for perfect game.
This side-by-side comparison makes it just crystal clear. On the left, you see perfect socializing. On the right, perfect game. The formulas are identical, except for that one single addition on the right, the AG variable for actively gaming.
So here it is, the official equation for perfect game, G equals C plus SC plus A plus AG. It really shows that to have perfect game, you must first be a perfect socializer, and then you add that intentional act of creating a romantic spark. All four variables have to be working together.
And just like with socializing, we can figure out what's wrong with someone's game by removing variables. For instance, take away authenticity, and your attempt feels totally fake. Or what if you only have congruence and AG? You're the awkward newbie. You look right, and you're trying, but you just don't have that social grace. And if you are only actively gaming with nothing else, the framework calls you a spam approacher. And down at the very bottom, failure to act, when all the variables are at 0 and you just freeze. This system gives a precise name and a reason for every one of these very common failures.
Woo! Okay, so we've defined the terms, we've broken down all the variables, and we've put together the equations. Let's bring it all home now and sum up the key takeaways from this whole social masterclass.
Let's just boil it down to the most important points. First, and you have to get this, game is built on top of socializing. You absolutely cannot have one without the other. Second, the real power of these equations is diagnostic. If you can see yourself as a weird extrovert, you know exactly what you need to work on: congruence and authenticity. And finally, remember the formulas for perfection. Socializing needs C, SC, and A. Game needs all of that, plus that intentional act of AG.
And all of this leads to what we can call the grand unifying theory of this framework. And it's so elegant in its simplicity. Perfect game equals perfect socializing plus actively gaming. That's it. That's the entire model distilled down into one clean, powerful idea.
So we'll leave you with this thought. The system is laid out, the formulas are right here on the board, and the variables are all defined. The only question left is the one that you have to answer for yourself. Which variable will you solve for first?